Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Overthrows podcast. I'm Behram who you can find at Def Mango on Twitter. And with me is Estelle Vasudevan, who you can find at Estelle_Vasudev, the number one on Twitter. And on today's show, we'll be reviewing Sri Lanka's 2-0 sweep versus New Zealand on home soil. So stay tuned for that. Let's go.
NV Play helped me make this content. For detailed performance breakdowns of your game using technology and data, contact them today. Hit Wicket is the cricket game backed by Harsha Bogle and me, so you know it's full of nerd energy. This strategic cricket game isn't just about frantic tapping. You make decisions based on how cricket actually works. You've got to set a batter up, right? And you can't hit a six from the first ball. Hit Wicket knows all that, and they made a game that makes it work with a few gaming twists in there as well. So play, build, and manage your team because you are the batter, the bowler, the coach, the selector. I mean, you're basically everything in this game, right? And there's no ads on Hit Wicket. So download it for free for mobile and unleash your inner cricket legend.
All right, Estelle. So we predicted a 1-1 stalemate for this series, the both of us. But instead, Sri Lanka have not only gone on to sweep New Zealand 2-0, but this is the first time they've defeated them in a test series in 15 years. So it's quite big.
Yeah, actually, that number caught me a bit by surprise that it's been that long. I suppose you can argue that they don't play each other that often. But yeah, it was a dominant series win from Sri Lanka, wasn't it? Because that second game in particular, you didn't feel like New Zealand were really in the game at any point. From Sri Lanka making 600 in their first innings and then bowling New Zealand out for less than 100. So, yeah, really superb performance. And the road to Lords is still open for Sri Lanka.
Yeah, we'll definitely come to that later. I think I'm going to end the show with all the, math with respect to Sri Lanka reaching the World Test Championship final. Also, we've got Fine X and Amaya Jayakar in the comments section. And welcome to you guys as well. So lots of performances that we need to talk about, Estelle. We're going to talk about Sri Lanka first and then New Zealand. But before any player, I want to talk about the coach. Sanath Jayasuriya first coached Sri Lanka to an ODI series win versus India for the first time since 1997. Then he went on to coach Sri Lanka to a test win in England for the first time in 10 years. And now a test series win versus New Zealand for the first time in 15 years. He's set to get an extension. I believe it's a year's extension. How do you feel about all of this?
Yeah, I mean, the results have come, haven't they? I mean, it's a 50-50 kind of feeling regarding Sanath Jayasuriya because, of course, he doesn't come with a huge amount of experience at the international level in terms of coaching. Obviously, he's played a lot of international cricket. But, I mean, if the team is playing well under him and he's getting the results, then there's no reason why things shouldn't be extended. But I will say, yes, the three results you mentioned are really important. But for Sri Lanka to be in such a good position in the World Test Championship in particular, it's because they have done well prior to that, right? They have been doing well. It's the white ball cricket in the World Cups that have been pretty terrible and has cost them, a lot. So I wouldn't attribute all the success to Sanath Jayasuriya alone, but obviously I mean, at least according to the players, he's having an impact. So I guess it's not an unreasonable appointment if he's going to stick around for another year.
Yeah, I definitely did not see this one coming because he doesn't have that level of experience, coaching an international team. And of course, he was a splendid player, but then in recent years, there have been some news which are not particularly great with respect to Sanath. But anyway, he's doing well. And I mean, he's going to get that extension and time will tell how successful his tenure ends up to be. Player of the series. Let's talk about him then. Slow left armer Prabath Jayasuriya. His figures in 4 innings in this series read 4 for 136, 5 for 68, 6 for 42, and 3 for 139. That is 18 wickets across both test matches at around 21 apiece, 9 in each test. And I asked Varun and Shayan to dig up some numbers, and you'll really love this. So he's played 16 tests in total and has 97 wickets. Of course, Only George Lohman has had more wickets than Prabath after 16 tests.
Mm.
George took 101, Prabath is at 97, and this is in the history of cricket. And 71 of Prabath Jayasuriya's 97 wickets have come at Gaul in just 8 test matches. So half of his test matches have yielded 71 wickets at an average of 21.78 and a strike rate of 44.4. He is basically a Gaul destroyer, and that's quite bizarre.
It's been an incredible start to his career, right? I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about Kamindu Mendis. Of course, we will talk about him later on. But Prabath has had almost as good a start to his career as Kamindu. Kamindu has, of course, made runs overseas, and Prabath hasn't quite been as successful in foreign conditions. But it's still a fantastic start to a career, isn't it? Like, I mean, I think someone was sharing a post on the most number of wickets at a single venue, and I think he's already like top 5 or something after
Yeah,
11 tests.
he's got like a match factor of 2, I believe, in Gaul. But yeah, there's
Mhm.
8 test matches in Gaul, which is half of his career, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? And what's really intriguing is that in the other 8 test matches, he's taken 26 wickets at an average of 46 and a half. And his strike rate is also 80. And what makes this even weirder is that he even sucks at Colombo. He's taken 10 wickets in 2 games over there at 36,
Mm.
37 apiece. What the hell is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to him, right, he's only played 2 games in Colombo. So, I mean, potentially if Sri Lanka start playing all their test matches in Colombo, there might be a different result. But I think and I think Jared discussed this in one of the videos we did on Sri Lanka as well, right? About how he's being used more of a stock bowler in overseas conditions. And I don't think he was terrible in England, right? He didn't play the
Yeah.
last test, but in terms of what his role was, I thought he wasn't that bad. He's not going to pick up a 10 wicket haul in, Lords or Manchester, right? That's not going to happen. But I thought he did relatively well. And of course, in test cricket, home advantage is such a massive thing because you don't get like extra points for winning overseas or whatever, so you have to capitalize on it as much as possible. And I feel like, although it's disappointing not to see tests at different venues around the country, if Sri Lanka are winning in Gaul and Prabath is dominating, I mean, it's fair that Sri Lanka keep hosting all their games there as well, right?
I mean, if I was Sri Lanka, I would only play at Gaul. I wouldn't even go to Colombo, right? Because if this man has 71 wickets in 8 test matches, which is nearly 9 wickets a game, right?
Mm.
It's freakish. You think about it, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Why not use that advantage? Because clearly you don't need the other bowlers to do much once he's on one, and he's always on one in Gaul. But it's been, another one of those series for him where he's literally steamrolled the opposition. And I mean, maybe he can even go on to break some records over here, right? Of course, Sri Lanka have some away series now, so maybe the records evade him, but we'll talk about that as time progresses. Let's move on to the other hero for Sri Lanka in this series, which was, of course, Kamindu Mendis, or how I like to call him, Kamindu Bradman. He scored 114 in the first test and was unbeaten on 182 in the second. Gaul is his hometown, which makes
Yeah.
these stuns all the more special for him. And he's set a few records over here. So no batter in the history of Test cricket has scored 50 plus scores in their first 8 test matches.
Yeah.
South Shakil held that record for first 7
Mm.
tests, and Kamindu has now gone on to break it and has scored 50 plus scores in 8 test matches. And overall, if you don't look at starts of career, if you look at like players who have done this or achieved this feat throughout their careers, only Babar Azam has achieved this feat overall. So, Kamindu has done really, really well over here. And in 13 innings thus far, he has scored 5 tons, 4 50s, and has only 4 failures. I mean, if you want to call them failures, right? He hasn't crossed 50 just 4 times in 13 innings. And he's also crossed 1,000 test runs in these 13 innings, equaling Bradman's record, with his test average currently standing at 91.27, which is about 8 runs shy of Bradman, right? How is any of this real?
It's been absolutely insane, hasn't it? And I think it's very important to note also that he made 100 in England, so no one is going to say, he's a minnow basher or, flat track bully or home track bully or whatever, right? He's made runs in Bangladesh as well, but I think that ton in England and I think he made two other 50s or one other 50. It really is going to take him far in terms of people's perspective on how his start to his career. He just he just doesn't look uncomfortable at all, right? Except for a couple of occasions, I think, when they were testing him around the off stump. He just looks so much at ease. And it's interesting you mentioned Galle being his hometown. Actually, the Galle International Cricket Stadium is where his school plays their big match in Sri Lanka. I don't know if you know about the big match
A
kind
little
of
bit.
culture. Yeah.
I do know a
So
bit.
the big, basically a schoolboy's biggest goal is to win the big match for his school, right? Like many of these schools have these rivalries, and they play their annual big match at the Galle Cricket Stadium. So he's definitely familiar with the conditions, right? He's pretty much he would have played at least three big matches there. So it's good to see. It's special. It's always special, right? Getting runs in
Yeah.
a ground like that. It just doesn't seem like it's going to end. I know it's going to end at some point. The good run's
Yeah.
going to end at some point. But he just looks so comfortable every time he comes out to bat that, like, he could score ton after ton after ton, and it would just be, normal proceedings, right?
Yeah, I mean, did you catch that reverse sweep versus Santner? That basically tells you just how comfortable he was feeling on the crease. I love his tattoo. It's Kohli-esque in some ways, and of course he's a left-hander. I'm a sucker for left-handers, so I already love come in daddy or come in doggy, whatever you want to call him, because he's got that dog in him, right? He definitely seems cut out for international cricket. And weirdly enough, Estelle, I remember when he first, came into the squad, Jared and I discussed him. We were focusing about his ambidextrous bowling, and that is probably his least talked about skill at the moment.
I do think that it is obviously a worthwhile thing to invest his time on, right? Because how many ambidextrous bowlers do you have in international cricket? And if you add the fact that he can bat like that, right, his value just skyrockets. But I'm happy, and I know I've said this many times before on this pod, that people are finally seeing that he's a batter first, and then he bowls a bit of spin with both
Yeah.
arms. We haven't seen it much in the tests, actually, right? I think we saw a bit of off spin, but we didn't see much of the left arm spin. So I think there's a comment here as well saying Steve Smith started as a spin bowler who can bat. Just saying, Kamindu Mendis is definitely a batter who can bowl a bit of spin. So different.
Also, even Steve Smith did start off
Yeah.
as a batter in, age group cricket, and then he got selected for Australia on the basis of his
I
spin
think
bowling.
it comes down to where the vacancy in the team is, right?
I mean, you look at Marnus as well, right? He came into the team because, well, he could bowl a bit of spin. Well, Varun has a comment for us over here. He says that Smith averaged 50 plus in Shield when he was picked.
Yeah.
And yeah, of course he did. And even, in his younger years, he was primarily a batter. But Kamindu Mendis, I at least did not know an awful lot about him before I met Estelle, and she has been informing us, in the group and everything. And it's just amazing to watch this journey. I don't want it to end. I read Andrew Fernando's piece, the we're still in the Kamindu Mendis fever dream one, and I don't want the fever dream to end. I want him to end with a 90 plus average in Test cricket, which obviously isn't possible. And he's got tours to South Africa and Australia coming up, so those will be real proper
Actually,
tests, right?
actually, Australia is at home, so
Oh, well, that helps, right? Definitely. So it's just that tour to South Africa then that will be testing because, well, if Sri Lanka, are playing Australia at home, I would even say that they might be slight favorites if they play at Galle and Prabath Jayasuriya is in the squad.
when
So
they play
yeah,
in Galle.
yeah, basically. So of course there were other performers in Sri Lanka, other centurions really. Let's start with Dinesh Chandimal. Injured in the last test in England at
Mm.
the Oval, could not keep wicket in this series and hence was batting at first drop, which none of us were really sure about. But he first scored an important 61 runs in the third innings of the first test, very, very crucial knock. And then he scored 116 in the first innings of the second test. Now, this is not his batting position, and he was, of course, playing as a specialist batter, which he's done before, but not so much at first drop. So, how promising is this revelation if Chandimal could kind of crack that number three position?
Yeah, I mean, he's been pretty special in being willing to be a bit selfless and go up
Hmm.
the order, hasn't he? Because if you look at Sri Lanka's problems over the recent past, the number three hasn't been getting runs. Kusal Mendis hasn't been getting runs, right? And he's been in that position for a few years now. Um, and that has really hindered the side in that the top order was struggling a bit. Um, I don't know whether Chandimal was told, look, either you keep or you move up the order. I don't know. Or whether he was willing to just move up and um, do that job for Sri Lanka. But it turned out that by him taking on that role, it meant that Sri Lanka getting runs from three different batters when they
Hmm.
were only getting runs from two, right? Like Kamindu was at 7 and getting runs. Chandimal was at 5 and getting runs. But you weren't getting runs from Mendis, who
Hmm.
was at 3. But by doing that switch, now you suddenly have three more batter, one extra batter who is making runs for you. And also, I think it protects Kamindu Mendis as well, doesn't it? Because there
Hmm.
were lots of calls that he's going to move up to number 3, and it would be a straight swap between him and the other K Mendis. Um, but I like the fact that they're trying to ease him into being the most important batter in the Sri Lankan lineup, right?
Yeah.
They're not throwing him into the deep end straight away, and that's very encouraging because that doesn't really happen a lot.
Hmm.
Um, Even with Kusal Mendis, I thought they handled him well in that when you need a keeper, you would rather have him than maybe a Sadira Samaravikrama who hasn't been great with the bat in the recent past. So
Yeah.
you want to test him out at number 7, and he came good as well. So really, that one change and that one senior batter being willing to kind of sacrifice a bit and move up the order. He has batted at number 3, I think, a couple of times and has not had a good run of it. So that was really encouraging because I don't know if you remember, but I did mention it in one of our previous pods, maybe in the England one, saying that if there's one criticism of Chandimal, it's that he's not been willing to move up the order. Um, but obviously, he's rectified that now. And I mean, who knows what's going to happen in South Africa? Of course, conditions are probably going to be tougher, but it was good to see from a senior batter willing to take on that difficult role.
Yeah, I mean, that switch worked like a charm, really. I remember us discussing this in the preview, and I wasn't even sure what to do with Kusal Mendes. I thought his best role was probably keep him at 3, tell him to attack. But here he's gone down to 7, right? And Chandimal has played at 3. Chandimal scored a ton as well, including a 61. And then Kusal Mendes, who I think you shared this post with us, right? Had last scored a century versus a World Test Championship team 6 years ago. And they've been, what, 14 Marvel movies since or something? He went on to first score a vital 50 in the first test, and then an unbeaten 106 in the second, while batting at 7 and keeping wicket. And in a way, this might even be better news than Chandimal scoring big at first drop, because Chandimal at least was getting runs and Kusal Mendes wasn't. And now they both are, or at least in this series. This was, of course, a performance which was a long time in the making, but it's definitely going to help Sri Lankan fans, breathe a bit easier.
Yeah, Kusa Mendes has been getting a lot of criticism. And I mean,
Hmm.
it's fair to a certain extent because, as you mentioned, he hasn't been making runs. He's had a couple of important knocks that weren't centuries during that 6 year period. But at number 3, you want your batter to be making runs, right? You want those
Hmm.
big innings from them. And that simply has not been the case. It's funny how moving him to 7 is it seems like a bit of a no-brainer now because he does play spin really well, and his
Hmm.
experience having batted at number 3 means that even if there's a new ball later on in the innings, he would be relatively more equipped to deal with that. It seems like a no-brainer now, but I don't think a lot of people were thinking about it maybe even a year ago, right? Because you weren't thinking about him as your test wicket keeper.
Hmm.
But again, it's turned out to be a really good move. I thought in the first test, although he didn't get 100, he played a couple of crucial knocks, put a couple of good partnerships together as well. So it's good to see runs from him because he's very much a confidence player, right? And you've seen how he's grown in confidence in limited overs cricket.
Hmm.
So maybe this is like the start of something for him, because he did definitely seem more comfortable out in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen his transformation in limited overs, and I have been a fan for one. And in Test cricket, you've been saying this for a long time that he doesn't even warrant a spot. But this is a new role. He's keeping wicket, he's batting at seven. Maybe it's lesser pressure as well, right? Because first drop is such a critical position that, and a tough position to bat in. It's not easy. You're practically an opener if there's an early wicket. So perhaps this is the start of a new era for Kusal Mendis in the Test team. Of course, only time will tell. And those were the three centurions, right? Kamindu, Kusal, and Dinesh Chandimal. But there were other senior batters who also came to the fore. Karunaratne finally scored a vital 83 runs in the third innings of the first test. And then Angelo Matthews racked up 50 and 88 in the last two innings that he played across both test matches. So both of those guys, experienced heads, coming good. And the only batter who really failed in the series, because DDS also got a couple of 40s, right? Was Pathum Nisanka, the hero of the Oval. He struggled to buy a run in the series, but we shouldn't be too concerned, right? I mean, it's only natural for a young player to fail in a couple of test matches.
Yeah, I don't think it's a massive concern for Sri Lanka. Obviously, opening is not the easiest spot as well. Just on
Hmm.
Dimuth and Angelo, I think they'll be a bit disappointed they didn't get hundreds, because there
Hmm.
were a couple of times when you felt like they were really set and they were really in, but it wasn't to be. But what I liked about the series was that, from a Sri Lankan perspective at least, that the senior batters were able to put partnerships together. I think even when Kamindu and Pathum didn't get runs at all, but even when Kamindu didn't have a good run in the first test, you had Angelo Dimuth putting on a partnership. Sorry, Dimuth and Chandimal, and then you had Angelo
Hmm.
and um, Kusal DDS putting on a partnership. So you had those senior batters really step up, which is kind of the opposite of what you saw in England, right? Because
Hmm.
in England, it was Pathum and Kamindu who were the standouts. You had a few cameos from DDS here and there, but that's what was good to see. And I think there's a stat going around. Sri Lanka is one of the few sides where you have five batters with more than 10 centuries in their top seven, right? And
Oh.
I think that's a pretty special stat, because if you think about it, Kamindu and Pathum haven't played much at all,
Hmm.
right? They played less than 10 tests. No, yeah, less than 10
Yeah,
tests,
yeah,
right? If
they
I'm not
have.
mistaken. So then every other batter has more than 10 centuries to their names, which is, I mean, it goes to show the importance of also persisting with batters over a few years when you have good performances. If I just go back, there was a lot of criticism when Kamidu came and made runs in England as to why he was dropped after his debut, right? Because he made 70
Hmm.
against Australia. He looked really good. Um, there was a lot of criticism there, but like if you think about it, it's because he replaced Dhananjay De Silva, right? And if
Hmm.
Sri Lanka were to keep just adding players whenever they wanted, um, then you wouldn't have had that stability of having those five batters who've been in the test side over the last 5 to 6 years, and you wouldn't have been able to build that kind of strong core that they have now. So I think that's also again pre Sanath era where things have been done right.
Yeah, just over here, Varun confirming to us that five players with 10 plus centuries and only five other sides have managed this. Of course, I feel like teams who are not a part of the big three don't really get to play a lot of test cricket. So you've got to stick to a core when it comes to team building. And you have to trust that core, because if they're playing 6 to 7 test matches in a year, then there's not a lot of room for experiment. And test cricket is a format where you've got to give people, an extended run to kind of prove their worth. And
Yeah.
if you look at this lineup, right, Karunaratne, arguably one of the finest openers in Sri Lankan Test history. Angelo Matthews did not go on to become what we thought he would, but he's still, quality. And then Chandamal has got, 16 tons now, right? Which is a lot of Test centuries. And he's kept wicket in between here and there as well. And, who else am I missing? DDS is
Kusal.
there. Kusal Mendis is there. So it's an experienced batting lineup with Kamindu and Pathum Nissanka, who are arguably more exciting than the rest. So it's really, it's an interesting place to be. And which is why Sri Lanka have their hopes alive, which is a topic I will save till the end because it just makes sense. On the bowling front, though, of course, we discussed Prabath Jayasuriya in detail. But I want to touch on debutant right arm off spinner Nishan Peiris. He played the second test and he picked up 9 wickets, including a 6 in his second dig. Now, him and Jayasuriya actually picked up 18 out of 20 New Zealand wickets in the second test. So New Zealand clearly failed their trial by spin. But, where the hell did he come from? Who is he? And why have we never heard of him?
Well, Sri Lanka have been persisting with Ramesh Mendis, haven't they? So there hasn't been that opportunity for another spinner to come through. I think a big concern for Sri Lanka is the lack of off spinners, right? There aren't that many kind of knocking the door down, which is a strange thing when you think about it, because Sri Lanka is known for producing a lot of spinners, but you're not seeing that test quality spinner coming through. I will say though, I think he has the third best figures on debut for a Sri Lankan. And number 1 and number 2 are Praveen Jayavikrama and Prabath Jayasuriya. So Praveen Jayavikrama, obviously, not the footsteps you want to follow.
Of course.
Right, he's currently serving a ban, but he also started with a lot of promise, right? And he was getting good revs on the ball. He was bowling really well, and there was a lot of talk about what the future is going to be. He made his debut before Prabath, right? He's much younger, but made his debut before Prabath Jayasuriya. Ramesh Mendis similarly had a very good start to his career, and there are a lot of question marks as to what happens to these spinners once they get into the national squad, because there is a massive deterioration in quality. I'm talking about Sri Lanka coming up against South Africa ahead, right? Lasith Ambuldennia was one of the most exciting talents to emerge from Sri Lanka's last tour of South Africa, where they beat them 2-0. And Lasith Ambuldennia is now pretty much, you don't see him at all, right? In domestic cricket,
you've got Prabath Jayasuriya, so if he's injured or something, that's the only scenario in which I can see.
No, I mean, even in domestic cricket, you don't see him, picking up a lot of wickets or being that kind of prolific spinner who you would expect someone who is kind of knocking on the door to be, right? And I don't think he's second in line to Prabath anymore, actually. So
interesting.
I think you have to keep everyone in Sri Lanka is going to be having a keen eye on Nishan, because there have been a lot of those young spinners emerging and then kind of seeing like a downward spiral after a few tests. So that'll be one of the things they will be concerned about, because Prabath has so far managed to kind of hold his own, right? He's successful in Gaul. He's been all right everywhere else he's played. But the young spinners, the ones who you're picking at, below 25 years of age, seem to struggle to kind of continue to be good. So that'll definitely be a concern for Sri Lanka, for Nishan in particular.
How old is he? I didn't actually check. Born in 97. So he's 27 years of age. He's not super young.
Not super young, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, 9 wickets on test debut, you can't really ask for more. And it is a very welcome sign for Sri Lanka. I was a touch surprised though, because sure, Ramesh Mendis hasn't really lit the world on fire. But he picked up 3 wickets in both innings in the first test, right? So it wasn't the worst performance. He took 6 wickets in the game. And I didn't understand why exactly he was shelved, because we discussed how he does bring a bit more balance with the bat, but maybe they didn't need that, right? Maybe they were going for more attacking options with the ball. Just explain that bit to me. Even though it turned out great, right? Nishan Peiris definitely seized his moment.
Well, it's like this with Ramesh Mendis. The problem is that although he's picking up wickets, he's very, very inconsistent with his lines and lengths and tends to go for a lot of runs, particularly early in his spells, right? So, in the first test, I think Sri Lanka bowled really badly in their first innings against New Zealand
Hmm.
and really let them get away with things a little bit before they pull things back on day three. So, his results don't reflect the fact that he wasn't very good early on, and it allowed the opposition to get away with things. I think in the second test, because Nishan was a lot tighter, it then allowed Prabath Jayasuriya also to do what he does best, right? So, and the thing is, Ramesh Mendis has had this issue for a while. That's what I'm talking about in terms of like deterioration. He's a wicket taking bowler because he spins the ball a lot, right? And he's tall, so he's got that high arm action and all of that.
Yeah.
He has those advantages. But over, I would say, the last 1.5 to 2 years, he's had a real problem with his consistency. I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough to tell you whether it's a technical problem or, what it is, but he's
Hmm.
definitely had issues. So I hope this doesn't mean like he's completely forgotten about, but that someone is able to work with him and kind of restore what we saw early on in his career, because there definitely seems to be some changes that have been made that have not quite worked for him.
Hmm.
So batting wise, I will actually tell you, they did pick Milan Ratnayaka, right? And I feel
Yeah.
that was insurance with the bat. Because I mean, Ramesh Mendis, we say he can bat, and everyone talks about the triple hundred he's made in first class cricket and all of that. But he doesn't really make a lot of runs internationally. Um, but I think they went with Milan Ratnayaka because they wanted to kind of have a bit of insurance. I think Nishan bats as well. I'm just trying to look up his
He
record.
averages less than 10 in first class cricket.
Okay, so he doesn't bat then.
Yeah.
But yeah, Milan was probably picked as that insurance option um, with the bat because he didn't bowl in the first innings. It was short innings, obviously 80 something all out, right? And then in second innings he bowled 2 overs. So definitely, it's funny when I think about Milan Ratnayaka. I always think the guy was probably not going to get any tests in England. Then he
Yeah.
bowled okay in the warm up, so they picked him. Then he made 70 with the bat, and that gave him 3 tests and one here, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it is an interesting arc. And yeah, I also hope that this isn't the end of Ramesh Mendis, but he's definitely out of the first team because
Mm.
the guy who replaced him took 9 wickets on debut. But anyway, that kind of wraps up all of our talking points on Sri Lanka. We'll be back after a short ad to talk about New Zealand and the grander narrative of Sri Lanka's qualification chances. So you guys are watching Overthrows with Behram and Estelle. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this short break.
Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you need to be just as careful with your computer's defenses as well. And for that, why not use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan and 4 additional months for free. It's also completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Sounds like roaming slang, but it's not. The link is in the show notes. So put in some dot balls and turn them into maidens via nordvpn.com/Kimber. If you make a lot of content like me, you will need help. And that is why we use Minvo.pro, a slicing and dicing tool that uses AI to conjure up great clips from your podcast chats and meetings. If you make content, go to Minvo.pro to cut it.
Welcome back to Overthrows. You guys are with Behram and Estelle, and we've discussed Sri Lanka at length. Time to go to the visitors, New Zealand, and let's start with their batting. Now, no centurions for them in this series, unlike Sri Lanka, because they had 3. And then New Zealand folded for 88 after Sri Lanka had declared on 602 for 5 in the first test. Here's a fun statistic. I don't think I've ever seen this before, but in all 4 innings, New Zealand's entire top 8 crossed 50 once and no one got a ton. We're talking about Tom Latham, Devon Conway, Kane Williamson, Daryl Mitchell, Glenn Phillips, Mitch Santner, Tom Blundell. They all crossed 50, but none of them could get to 80. And Rachin Ravindra was actually on the verge of pulling off a heist, but then he got out on 92 in the fourth innings of the first test. So you don't really get to see that frequently, do you? That everyone just performs once and they don't go big either of those times.
And particularly from those names, right? You're
Yeah.
accustomed to seeing some of them make big hundreds, and that's what lost them the series, basically, right? They couldn't
Hmm.
put together those big partnerships. They couldn't make big runs. And Kane Williamson, we spoke about his record against Sri Lanka, and then his record against Sri Lanka in Sri Lanka, and it just continued, right? He wasn't great with the bat. Sri Lanka, I thought, worked him out pretty well, but I think New Zealand will be really disappointed with the fact that they got those starts, but they weren't able to kick on. I mean, if you even look at the runs that Santner made in the second test, both innings, right?
Hmm.
Once he got in, it wasn't very tough to bat, right? And he was
Yeah.
able to kind of, as long as someone was sticking with him on the other end, he was able to attack the spinners and get some partnerships going. But you didn't see that from the top order. I think apart from maybe Phillips and Blundell in the second test, and Rachin
Hmm.
obviously, played that superb innings in the first one. I thought it all went downhill from maybe the first innings in the first test, where they should have probably got a 100 plus lead, because they were 250 for four going into day three, if I'm not mistaken, and then
Yeah.
folded for 350 something. So um, that's when it kind of went downhill, because if they had got big enough lead there, Sri Lanka would have been under a huge amount of
Hmm.
pressure. New Zealand definitely ran them a lot closer than they would have liked in that test. And if they had just managed to put on a bit more runs in that first innings, they would have, definitely had stood a chance of winning that game. But in the second test, after you make 88 all out, right, there's no coming back from that, especially after you've conceded 600. So it almost didn't matter how well they batted in the second innings, because there's no way they were coming back in that game.
Yeah, I mean, if your top eight, each of your top eight batters is crossing 50 at least once, either you expect them or at least a couple of them to make it count and go big, or you expect someone to score another 50 in the series, right? Like, that's the really weird part that I found. And I didn't watch both of these tests
Mm.
like a lot of them. I watched them in patches, of course, because there's been a lot of cricket going on. But that first test that you speak of, I watched a bit more of it, right? And there were moments, as you said, where New Zealand were really on top and they could have capitalized, but they failed to, or their batters failed to go big and, kind of dig it out in the middle and just occupy the crease for a longer period of time so that they can kind of get to those daddy hundreds or scores, or they didn't even get to a single hundred, right, in the series. So I think that kind of, was their Achilles heel,
Mm.
that they couldn't bat for long periods, as opposed to Sri Lanka, where, in the second test, Sri Lanka just literally batted New Zealand out of the game. And everyone was talking about, oh, I was even talking about this, that have they waited too long? Should they have declared earlier? Well, clearly that didn't matter in the end, did it? Like, it was enough time in the test to bowl New Zealand out twice, and they bowled them for 88 once. So that was quite a phenomenal way to kind of wrap up the series as well. Where in the first test, it was kind of even Stevens for the longest time. Even going into the last day, you felt that Rachin is batting, in the 90s. New Zealand require what, 60, 50, something like that, right? There was a chance. But then,
Mm.
of course, it's really tough to do it versus Prabath Jayasuriya and Gaul.
Yeah, I mean, they I think this also comes down to like the experience Sri Lanka have in those conditions, because I
Hmm.
think after, if I'm not mistaken, the first day's play, Dinesh Chandimal, who was at the press conference, said that like it's really good batting conditions,
Hmm.
but in conditions like this, where it's really flat and it's really hot out there, by the end of day two and day three, the ball is going to start kind of spitting off the track. And
Yeah.
I think when we talk about declaration, I think that was what they were discussing. They didn't want to declare too early and give New Zealand a chance to get a start and bat when the conditions were relatively good for batting. I thought they timed it really well,
Hmm.
despite a lot of argument whether they should have allowed Kamindu to just go for the double hundred. I thought the
Well,
timing
I
was
mean, they did allow him to equal Bradman's record, right? So they did kind of wait for that. That much was
Yeah.
evident.
Yeah, actually, Dhananjay De Silva mentioned that as well, saying that there was a reachable record for him, and he wanted to wait for Kamindu to complete that before declaring. But when it came to the double hundred, they had already discussed that they would want a certain number of overs or a certain period of time that they want to bowl at New Zealand at the end of day two, and the decision was based solely on that and not about individual records. And look, Kamindu is going to make a double hundred at some point, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's impossible to think that that's never going to happen in his career.
Mhm.
Uh, so I thought it was a really good decision, and it's a good sign as to what the team is aiming at and what their goals are, because it was always team first. I thought even in the second innings when Prabath had a chance of kind of equaling the fastest 200 wickets record, there was no extra push to give him a more attacking field or anything like that. It was more about what the team's plans are and strategically what is better for the team. So encouraging signs from Dhananjay as well as captain. As you know, we love to talk about DDS,
Yeah.
or Jared loves to talk about
Yeah.
DDS,
We do
but
not tolerate any DDS slander on good areas, basically. That's what it is. But
yes,
he's what
it's been
racked
good
up
start. Yeah.
three consecutive test wins as captain, so
Mm.
that is impressive, right? It's been a while since Sri Lanka have done that, and those wins have come against like really good sides. They beat England at the Oval, and now they've defeated New Zealand. Okay, they are a team which is kind
Mm.
of declining, but they've still
Yeah.
got some quality players, right? So these are fantastic results for Sri Lanka. And if we talk about New Zealand's bowling, they definitely looked short on spin bowling prowess, right? Didn't they? Sure, Rajaz Patel picked up 8 wickets in the first test, including 6 for 90 in the third innings, but he went 41 overs wicketless in the second test.
Mm.
And in fact, in the second test, it was Glenn Phillips who took 3 wickets out of
Yeah.
the 5 Sri Lankan wickets that fell, which kind of is a harrowing statistic. Santner didn't come through like they wanted him to. Even Ajaz Patel couldn't take a wicket in the second test. He was good in the first, of course. So maybe they should have played Bracewell. I don't know. Like, what's your assessment of the situation?
I think it's a bit tough to call the selection, but Ajaz Patel was pretty disappointing. I thought in the second test, he gave a lot of freebies, a lot of short stuff, a lot of full tosses, and just wasn't able to get consistency going. Glenn Phillips was by far the most threatening spinner from New Zealand, and that is, as you said, that's a bit scary for them, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're going to talk about Gauls conditions and it being the reason why Prabath Jayasuriya is so successful, then by that argument, you should at least see 50% of that success from the other bowlers, right? And when you're not seeing that, it becomes a issue about skill. And Ajas has obviously done well in the past, but I thought in this series where he was to kind of lead the charge for New Zealand in the second test in particular, he was a bit disappointing.
Yeah, definitely. And even after that first test, I thought, okay, New Zealand are in this series solely because this guy has picked up 8 wickets in this
Mm.
test, and his 6 for 90 was really impressive. But I feel like more than anything else, that's what let them down in the second test. The
Yeah.
bowling just did not, come to the party, and Ijaz Patel was, a big weak link over there. But there was one positive storyline for New Zealand in this series. Right arm seamer William O'Rourke, who did go wicketless in the second test as well and got smashed actually. He picked up 5 for 55 and 3 for 49 in the first test, so 8 wickets in total. And he was generating an insane amount of bounce off the surface. That's what I remember from that test match, right? We did not expect him to start, the both
Yeah.
of us, but he did, and he definitely captured our imaginations. So, how impressed were you with William O'Rourke, and do you think he's one for the future for New Zealand?
Oh, most certainly. I thought, like you said, we didn't think he would start that first test, right? We thought it'd be Matt Henry. But the pace he was able to generate as well as the bounce, I think someone had tweeted saying he's very much like Morne Morkel. And I think
Yeah, I
there's a
saw
bit
that
of it
tweet.
in his action as well, right? The way he follows through and stuff. So he looks like a good prospect for New Zealand. it's always tough, right, in conditions like Gaul. And I think you can excuse him for not getting wickets in that second test because the conditions were really batting friendly in those first couple of days. And as a pacer, it's always going to be tough. But he was
Hmm.
superb in the first. I think that 5 wicket haul was what kept New Zealand kind of ahead of the game
Yeah.
in that first test, at least for the early part of it. So definitely one for the future. I think also we have to discuss Team Southee, right? He
Yeah. We'll
hasn't
come
had
to
a great,
Saudi.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely go there, but just a little more on William O'Rourke. He's only 23, right?
Mm.
Weirdly enough, he was born in Surrey, in England. And in the 4 test matches that he's played thus far, he does have 19 wickets at less than 20 apiece, despite going wicketless in the final test of the series. So he had 19 wickets in 3 test matches, albeit 9 of those have come in a single test against South Africa's D team. So New Zealand fans can definitely be excited about this right arm quick.
Sorry, guys, give me 1 second, okay?
Yeah, yeah, go for it. I'll keep you guys busy till then. And, we talk about New Zealand's golden generation and how a lot of those seam bowlers kind of came at the same time. Tim Southee, Trent Bolt, Neil Wagner, and then also throw in Kyle Jamieson over here as well, because those 4 guys were imperative to New Zealand's cause when they went on to lift the World Test Championship trophy, or mace, actually, in the first edition. So it's very important for New Zealand to unearth a new generation of fast bowlers, because that was where their success came from in the previous generation. And William O'Rourke kind of fits the bill. Anyway, you were talking about Tim Southee, and of course, he needs to be spoken of. He is New Zealand's captain in Test cricket, and in 3 innings where he bowled in Sri Lanka, he took 2 wickets. Now, granted, he has 382 wickets in 102 Test matches. He is, however, 36 years of age still, and in 14 tests as captain, Tim Southee has taken just 35 wickets at an average of 28.6 and a strike rate of 80.5. So, if you do the math, basically he had 346 wickets in 88 test matches, and he's fallen off a cliff since. And what it comes down to is that he's kind of keeping someone like Matt Henry out of the team right now. And I am sure that if Tim Southee belonged to the subcontinent rather than New Zealand, right, fans would be demanding a castration right about now. Oh, your volume is gone.
Oh, one
Oh, you're
second.
back. Yep.
Back?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Uh, he's really struggled, hasn't he? I mean,
Hmm.
apart from, I think he got Pathum Nissanka's wicket early on in the second test, but apart from
Yeah.
that, just wasn't bowling well. And when you think about it, in conditions like you get in Sri Lanka, sometimes you'll have bowlers who bowl really well, quick bowlers who bowl really well, but they don't, like, their figures don't reflect it, right? They don't get the wickets.
Hmm.
Like maybe an Asitha Fernando had a really good spell, but didn't pick up the wickets. But his role was to kind of bowl that tight
Hmm.
line and length. You didn't see that from Southee, and I think that's what would be most concerning for New Zealand, because he's captain, right? So
Yes.
you, by him being captain, it means that you basically have only one slot for a pace bowler, and you're picking William O'Rourke, and he's justified that
Hmm.
selection. But it means that another guy is sitting out, like Matt Henry. I mean, you never know. Maybe Henry wouldn't have had a good run in Sri Lanka. You don't. I mean, we can't say for sure.
Hmm.
But it does limit your options when your captain is not performing well. If it's a bowling captain in particular, I think, because if it's a batting captain, you almost have like more kind of positions in your team that you can kind of work around. But when it's a bowling captain, and particularly a fast bowling captain
Hmm.
in subcontinental conditions, then it's really really tough, I think, to work around that when he's not bowling well. um, Matt Henry's like that unlucky kind of cricketer, right? He's
Yeah.
always the 12th man, and he only gets an opportunity if somebody's injured. Every time you think like, no, he's done enough in this series to be picked in the 11 in the next one, they don't pick him, and then whoever is picked instead of him does well, like it was the case this time.
I mean, if you look at how well Matt Henry bowled in that series versus Australia, right?
Mm.
He was New Zealand's best player. At that point, I thought, okay, Trent Bolt has kind of retired, right? I don't see him featuring in a test match anytime soon or ever, maybe. So, keeping that in mind, I thought Matt Henry was a shoe in, and the fact that he didn't start a single game in this series was a bit shocking to me. And of course, 35 wickets in 14 test matches. That's just not good enough from Tim Southee. And that's not to say that he hasn't had a successful career. I've been a
Mm.
fan. He's been a very, very, loyal servant of New Zealand cricket. And he served them over so many years, was an age group cricket product, under 19 World Cup and all. And it's tough to hate on him because all of these New Zealand guys are just such lovely cricketers and human beings and all of that stuff. But it might be time to hang up his boots in this format, at least, I feel. In T20s, he might still have something to offer because he's got a good cutter. And he's got, 164 wickets, I think, in T20Is as well, which is the most ever. But yeah, I just am not sold on Southee in Test cricket anymore. And the numbers kind of prove it. And like I said earlier, if he was a subcontinent team captain, things would be very nasty by now. 100% they would be.
I think it's also a question about how seriously New Zealand takes Test cricket, right? I mean, just a point on like when we released that video about Sri Lanka being in contention for the World Test Championship final. I think if you look at Sri Lanka, how they've kind of handled the Test team, it's they are very much serious about Test cricket and where they end up on the World Test Championship and all of that. It feels like that interest has dropped in a few teams, including New Zealand. First of all, I think it's questionable appointing Southee captain at his age, right? Because you're not going to get like 5-6 years out of him, right? He's going to eventually, within a short period of time, have a dip in form, and then you're going to want to look ahead at someone else. So I think that's also something to think about, whether it is being prioritized, because as you know, Sri Lanka, New Zealand, South Africa, they don't play as much test cricket as they used to. And a lot more investment goes into white ball cricket, right? So I guess that's one thing to think about as well.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Mark Chapman recently, and
Mm.
he was of the opinion, or not of the opinion, but he basically wanted to represent New Zealand in all formats, and international cricket was kind of his goal, right? Which is refreshing to hear and also a bit different from what
Mm.
we, are experiencing, in the cricketing landscape or franchise T20 era, if you will. But yeah, I mean, it is a side which has been declining, not just like recently. If you look at the last cycle as well, right? They weren't particularly impressive.
Mm.
And I mean, you think of South Africa, and they could have been in the reckoning for the final, or still are, but could have been even in a better position if they played their first team in New Zealand and maybe won a test
Yeah.
match, right? That would have changed things for them. So it is like cricket is in a funny place, but at least, we've got this feel good story about Sri Lanka brewing. And yeah, here's to hoping that it remains competitive, I suppose. One last thing I want to talk about before we talk about the math and how Sri Lanka could make it. The catching on both sides was horrendous in this series. An insane number of catches were put down, and that is not something you expect when New Zealand plays Sri Lanka, because both island nations historically have been solid fielding sides. And in the first test match, a dropped catch nearly cost Sri Lanka the game because New Zealand wouldn't have even gotten close otherwise.
Mm.
And in the second test match, you can make an argument that maybe Sri Lanka wouldn't have scored 602 if New Zealand had caught their catches, right? So it's so weird to me. I've been keeping a very close eye on this. We're seeing more and more dropped catches in cricket. I don't know if it's because maybe batters are playing more aggressive and there are more opportunities, but at least I feel like these many catches never got dropped back in the day.
I would actually say that Sri Lanka were very good in second test. They took a lot of sharp chances close in around the bat. New Zealand, I don't think I've ever seen a sloppier performance by them on the field. Obviously, I haven't watched every single test they've played, but I don't think we've seen as sloppy a performance as that from them in maybe like the last 5 to 6 years, because they dropped a number of catches. I think Darren Mitchell put down Kamindu and was it Dinesh Chandimal, one of the top order batters as well, and that ended up costing them, right? And you don't often say it, but Sri Lanka definitely outfielded New Zealand in the second game. Um, So that's another point, as you mentioned, right? Result, or at least the kind of gap between the two sides would have
Hmm.
been lessened to a great deal if they had taken those opportunities. And again, it's not something you see from New Zealand. New Zealand is
Yeah.
usually like that, stable, steady. They'll be good, sometimes great. But you didn't really see that from them in the field in the second game, and it ultimately cost them. Obviously conditions were a bit tough, I think, because even the Sri Lankan batters were talking about how hot it was out there. And it was a bit, you know, like difficult to concentrate also with the sun kind of beating down on you. But I mean, this is international cricket, right? And they're international cricketers, so I think they will be disappointed with that fielding performance.
Yeah, it's just not something you associate with New Zealand at all. They're very, very clinical in the field. Like growing up, New Zealand, South Africa, Australia, these teams didn't really drop the ball at all,
Mm.
metaphorically or literally, right? Because they were just very, very efficient when it came to the basics, and fielding is part of the basics, I feel. And yeah, it's something that will concern them a lot. But anyway, let's come to the fun part now. Let's talk math. And of course, if we do the match, Sri Lanka do have an outside chance of qualifying for the World Test Championship final. Krunk over here has asked the same question as well. And he said that if India beat Australia and Sri Lanka draw or beat Australia, can they make the final? So now there are two test series, right? One is an away test series in South Africa, and then they play Australia at home. And they'll need results in those games, particularly the Australia ones. But probably they'll need a win in South Africa as well. That's my understanding of it, isn't it, Estelle?
Yeah, that's mine as well. I think before this series, it was something like they would need 5 wins out of 6 games, right?
Hmm.
So at least one win against South Africa. That is, if you expect them to whitewash Australia, which is going to be tough. I mean, last
Hmm.
time Australia were here, it was 1-1, right? So
Yeah.
it's going to be tough, but I think there's an outside chance. Like you can't bet against them just yet.
I mean, you're basically saying that Sri Lankan fans can dare to dream.
I'm saying, just imagine, it would be, I don't know, it would be funny to me if Sri Lanka beat out Australia or India to go into the World Test Championship final. It's still a long shot, you have to say, right? Because as I said, Australia were really good in Sri Lanka the last time they were over after losing 3-0 in 2016. The last time they were here, it was 1-1, right? And I think it was just like one innings by Dinesh Chandimali made a double hundred in the second test, and then Prabath did Prabath things in goal.
Hmm.
And that's how Sri Lanka were able to level the series. South Africa is not going to be easy either. Um, Sri Lanka have won there, so I think that will give them a bit of confidence.
Yeah, I was
But
going to say, right?
it's not going to
This,
be an easy series by
yeah.
any stretch.
It's been 5 years, so half a decade since that win, but Sri Lanka are the only Asian side to ever win in South Africa.
Pretty much the
And
same batting
this,
lineup as well. So
yeah, but it is a beatable team, right? Because South
mm,
Africa's batting is not the same, and it's not unbelievable to think that Sri Lanka might sneak away with a test win, right? Maybe
and
not the
also
series, but at least one game, and that
yeah.
might be enough, in the grand scheme of things.
Mm. And also, by the way, the A team was just over in South Africa and beat them 2-0 in the 4-day
Ah,
series. So, I mean, I don't know if they, offer up the same conditions for the test series, but
hmm.
it's not an impossibility. But it's a tough kind of run for them, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, even in the last World Test Championship cycle, Sri Lanka were in it till the very last series,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. So it's fun how once again they might find themselves in a similar position. Blacksmith, the tracker, has a question for you, Estelle. He or she or they, I'm not sure, not can't really tell the gender from that name, is asking how will Sri Lanka's team structure uh, going to look like in the upcoming South Africa series? Will they use a single spinner and three seamers, or two spinners and two seamers?
I think it'll be very similar to what they did in England, right?
Hmm.
I don't see them playing two spinners, particularly because, like, obviously Nishan Peiris is pretty new. He's just made his debut, so how he goes in conditions like that will be a question mark. But I think given the success that the Quicks had in England, it would be a bit harsh, I think, to leave one of them out in conditions like that, unless South Africa offer like a dry pitch where they're not expecting too much bounce.
Hmm.
I would think Sri Lanka will go for the three pacers.
Both Fernandos and Lahiru.
Yeah, both Fernandos and actually Vishwa Fernando is having a bit of a niggle, so I don't know
Hmm.
whether he will be fit. But of course, they've got Kasun Rajita, they've got Milan Ratnaik, a few of those guys waiting in the wings as well, right? So,
Yeah.
think if there are no injuries, then there is enough depth there to play three quicks.
And if they win a test match over there, they'll be even more motivated in that series versus Australia. Like if Sri Lanka can tie the South Africa series 1-1, I would back them to, sweep Australia more. If they get swept in South Africa, then maybe they even lose that series versus Australia. But I feel like confidence will be a big factor in all of this. And if they know that they have fate in their own hands after the South Africa series, this is going to be a very, very interesting finish to this World Test Championship cycle. And all of you also let us know in the comments section, what you feel will happen. Do you think Sri Lanka have a chance? Or what percentage would you give Sri Lanka, with respect to probability of making the World Test Championship final? What would that number be for you, Estelle? 30?
Can I
20?
just say how amazing, like how far have we come from talking about Sri Lanka losing 2-0 to Pakistan at home,
Yeah. I mean,
and
if you
Pakistan
think
being
about it,
so bad in the recent past, and then now
if
they're in the conversation for the World Test Championship final.
if you really think about it, Sri Lanka losing those two tests versus Pakistan is really hurting them right now.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
and
I mean
and
that happened
this
in the
team
last
probably
cycle
wouldn't
as
have.
well.
This team probably wouldn't have lost those test matches. The one that's playing right now.
Yeah, I guess the batting was certainly different,
Hmm.
wasn't it? But
Yeah.
I think this happened in the previous cycle as well, where Sri Lanka dropped a couple of tests at home, and
Hmm.
that's what cost them in the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I like the fact that it's still open, right? There are
Hmm.
still a lot of teams vying for those two top positions, because if you look at global cricket right now, you would think it's going to be the big three who are going to be at the top of that table, but you still have other teams kind of, and like no one's talking about Sri Lanka right at the beginning of a World
Yeah.
Test Championship cycle. No one's really talking about them, but it's good to see like it's still in the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, the permutations are there for people to kind of work out on their
I just hope
calculators
they
or
don't go
whatever.
four
So,
zero now, okay?
yeah. So, I mean, that's the fun part about sport. I feel like the
Mhm.
most enjoyable moments are these little pockets where anything is possible. And I love to have like my fun during that time and play around with different permutations. So, we encourage you guys to do the same. And we also hope that you enjoyed this episode. Thank you to everyone who was there with us in the comments. And yeah, we'll be bringing more live shows to your screens. I believe there might be one tomorrow with me and Jared. And Estelle right now is in Dubai. So she'll be covering the Women's T20 World Cup. And I'm quite sure that Jared will have her on to discuss some games whenever there's like a close one or something. So we are geared towards bringing you guys top quality content on the regular. And just a quick reminder, you can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. That can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of this team, whether it be written content, podcasts, or videos. That's it from myself and Estelle for this video, and we'll see you guys soon enough once again. Have a good one, folks, and goodbye.
Thanks to MP Play, I was able to make this. Their advanced technology can help any cricket team elevate their skills and performance. If you have a passion for sports and aspire to work in the industry, I invite you to explore my course, Fans with Laptops. This program is designed to equip you with the knowledge and skills necessary to excel in sports journalism. Fans with Laptops is a test match course tailored to the digestible T20 world. Embrace your nerdish obsession for sports and unlock your potential by enrolling in Fans with Laptops. Celebrate your cricket heroes with bodyline t-shirts. Explore their player-inspired tees, featuring legends like Sachin Tendulkar, Brian Lara, and Viv Richards. They also have team-inspired designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds. Their collection is a must-have for the true cricket enthusiast.